Consfeld, and first I need to introduce myself, I forgot. I'm Joe McMonigal. I'm a remote viewer. Actually, I own a company called Intuitive Intelligence, and I've run that company since 1984, and not a lot of people know about it probably because I operate anonymously with many customers all over the world, and I do remote viewing with all those customers and guarantee total anonymity to all my customers. I also demonstrate remote viewing live on television. I've done over 150 of those double-blind demonstrations so far. But in any event, our first presentation this morning is with Dr. May, and he's going to give us a presentation in the advances in anomalous cognition analysis, a judge-free and accurate confidence calling technique. It's a very interesting presentation, and it's kind of technical, so it'll be really interesting anyway. Dr. May.
Good morning. Thank you for flying yourselves out of bed to come and hear this talk. And you have my permission to doze off if you wish to, but I think you might find it fascinating, at least I hope. Advances in anomalous cognition analysis. And that's just our term for remote viewing, extrasensory perception. We chose that term a number of years back simply because it is the most neutral we can think of. It has no underlying assumptions about it. We gain information, cognition, in ways we don't currently understand, and thus the term anomaly. Okay. This is an outline. Can you hear me? I prefer to speak louder if it need to be. I'm good at screaming. A new anomalous cognition, a remote viewing protocol, an old analysis method, but with a new twist. I'm not bringing something new to this table. But those of you who have followed some of the research out of our laboratory know we deal with something, a mathematical concept called fuzzy sets. Don't worry, there's not a single equation in this whole presentation. If you like equations, read the proceedings. Some study details, what we actually did, what the results were, and multiple coders. As I'll get to this a little later, but we got such a wonderful result, my colleague said, "Oh, Ed, it's your ESP, not Joe's." I said, I'm being blamed for decision augmentation on my part, so this is a bit of a defense against that. And some examples. Okay, how does the protocol go? We have an experimenter, me in this case, and my computer, which is down here on the floor. And it's a between 10 and 10:15, I see this screen, I hit this button, start. And the remote viewer sitting here produces a response. And that's just a characteristic response. What it is some, it says gentle slope and so on, and you'll see that in a minute. That's all the experimenter sees. The remote viewer doesn't see any of this. And when the session is over, I hit stop. And here, it's probably a little hard to see. This is the complete response for that trial. I wouldn't pay too much attention, but it's characteristic. One-page response, not 20 pages. And it says mountains in background, gentle slope, break, church, castle, or so on. And so my job, having seen this response, is simply to encode it in terms that the computer can understand, i.e. fuzzy sets. What does that look like? I see a screen in front of me that looks exactly like that, and my job is to move these sliders around to the degree to which I'm convinced, for example, buildings are in this response. For example, he says church or castle. I'm 100% there's buildings in that response. This is not at all associated with the degree to I think building is in the target. Targets haven't even been chosen yet. So by this technique, I go through and encode this response. For example, village and towns, I only gave it about a 10% chance that I, the judge, think towns are in here because there's multiple, whatever those are. And, well, maybe that sort of indicates towns. He doesn't say towns, but that's my subjective assessment, and so on. I won't go through the whole thing. For example, man-made, because there's buildings. Prominent central, there's that big church, if you go back, that looked kind of prominent and central to me, and so on. Here is the only part of the subjectivity that goes into this process. This is what's called a fuzzy set representation of a response. Then the computer takes over. As soon as I hit OK, the computer randomly chooses from one of 12 possible groups of targets, one of those groups. Each of these groups have 3 categories in them, and you can read in the proceedings that there's a lot of effort that went in to make sure that each of these categories are as different from one another as possible. Like the category might be waterfalls, one of towns, and one of puppies. Well, actually not, but it gives you an idea that they're all different from one another, all right? And then having chosen 3 categories, each of the 3 categories has 5 similar pictures in it. Like if it's waterfalls, there are 5 different waterfalls in there. The computer then randomly assigns these 3 categories to high, low, and between. And this is what I see. What the computer does is to compute the accuracy, reliability, and figure of merit. And what that means in English, there's algebra to support this, is that the accuracy is the percent of the target that was described correctly in that response. The reliability is the percent of the response that was correct, which is different, of course. And the figure of merit is the product of these 2. And so what I see on the screen in front of me is the 3 targets which have been labeled high, low, and between, and their figure of merit. This one has the highest figure of merit. Still, no target has been chosen. So this is a judge-free procedure. The computer did this calculation, and it does a rank ordering. That's the first rank it thinks is the right target. That's the second one, and this is the third one. So then, as soon as I hit OK here, the answer is generated randomly. And in this case, it was the correct answer. Now, let's look on and see what this looks like. The figure of merit is simply a number associated with a given response to a given target. It doesn't know anything at all about ranking. It doesn't know about other targets in the pool. It's a rating number, not a ranking number. And you're familiar with that. Ratings are absolute, rankings are relative. And that's a very important feature here. So then you have to ask the question, what does a figure of merit actually mean statistically? So what I do is I went back and looked at a previous study with 75 trials in it, with the same participants, with the same target pool, but it was done like 10 years ago. And I can then do cross matches. What I mean by that is take a given response and match it against all the other targets except the correct one. And that gives me an estimate of what the null hypothesis distribution of the figure of merit is, i.e., under the conditions that there's no remote viewing going on, what would be the likelihood of seeing a figure of merit under that case? And what we get is a distribution that looks like this. And I can say for a given figure of merit, at 0.3, that is this position on this distribution, and computer p-value with no underlying assumptions. It's just this red area here divided by the total area. So this gives me a p-value, an effect size, a z-score for each individual trial based on the idea that we have a null distribution for the figure of merit under the conditions of no remote viewing happening whatsoever. So does that work? I could then use this figure of merit or its associated z-score as a confidence call. Let's see if that works. First off, there were 2 hypotheses for this study. The auto-judging would produce a significant number of hits. Second hypothesis, that the significant figures of merit, those were to the right of the 0.05 cutoff in that previous distribution, would serve as a confidence call in advance of any knowledge about what the target was. So the a priori results was we had 32 hits out of 50 trials for this statistic, an effect size of 0.65. Very strong result. And of the 12 figures of merit that met the condition of being significant, 10 of them were correct, with an effect size over 1. Now what that means is, if you use this procedure a priori to pick out in your study only those studies which had a significant figure of merit that went into the formal analysis, in 25 trials you would have a z-score of 5 or better. All right, so let me show you, give you a gut feeling what this sort of looks like. That is, I've given you, like the physics people always like to tell you, our typical best ever. This is the best of the entire series of 50 trials, to give you a gut feeling what it looks like. Mountains, river, gorge, small outdoor vista, a nice sunny outdoor vista, flowers, mountains, and things that look like that. That was the target. This had an individual Z-score of 2.4 with a figure of merit of 0.641, and of course it got a first place rank. So, okay, what does something look like that's not quite as good? Here's one that's just barely significant. There's a lot of stuff here. The target was a mosque, and this woman said structure, and I thought it had some bridge elements in it, because that looks like a bridge, and she's got water. So there are some obvious wrong elements here, and the automatic judging procedure says, yeah, it's pretty good, but not as good as the previous one. And I won't go through my coding of that, because we don't have as much time. Here's one that it has a Z-score of about 1. That's pretty good. It did manage to get a first place rank, but there's all kinds of wrong stuff here. It's white. Well, there is some white, but it's not square. Looks like a target is a building, main part of the background. It's distinctive with color and so on, but he didn't get a city or a river or anything at all like that. So it was good enough to be a first place match, but not good enough to be really a significant individual remote viewing. Here's one that has a Z-score of nearly 0, and here it looks like a water scene with shore. It looks like an island with trees on it. Oops. And it didn't give a good result. It was a chance result. So that's good. It should do that, because it's, in this case, not a very good remote viewing. And here's one that's the worst of the bunch, and it has a negative Z-score, a rank of 3, of course, and a figure of merit of this. And, well, there is some things that match. The city's not there, water's not there, mountains are there, but nothing else is. And so it gives you a gut feeling to the degree to which this automatic judging procedure matches what you might do if you were a physical judge looking at the targets. Does a pretty good job of it. So here's the question of experimenter side, and this is not in the paper. Maybe I'm psychic. I'm certainly blind to all the targets. I'm experienced in general with this type of coding and very experienced with this set of participants. Two other individuals, Richard and Zoltan Bashi in Hungary, challenged me to code the responses in a blind way, independent of me. Post hoc, of course, they individually coded all 50 responses, and they bitched and moaned and complained about how hard that was. Computer correlations and study statistics accordingly. Here we go. Good news. All 3 response coders produced significant first place hits, post hoc Stouffer Z across all sessions, sum of rank statistics, and large correlations for session Z-scores. And here's what they look like. Bad news, however, they were not capable of producing significant confidence calls. And Richard and I have been talking about it, and if we have some time, I'll discuss that here in a minute, why I think that's the case. Here are the statistics. Here are the 3 coders. Here's a whole bunch of statistics associated with the study, and you see here at the bottom the number of confidence calls. I had 12, and 10 were correct. They each had 6, with only 2 correct. But here are the individual statistics. Richard had a Z-score of 2.3, basically, and Zoe, with his mother language is Hungarian, which is interesting, has a significant number of hits as well. And Stouffer Z's and so on. You can read that. So there is some interjudge reliability. I shouldn't say judge, intercoder reliability, because these people coded up these responses, not knowledgeable about any of the targets, of course, obviously blind. So that gave me a warm fuzzy. At least it wasn't all my side. So why did I get a better result here? First, let me show you what some of the correlations look like. I won't go through all of them. This is the correlation of maze coding for Z-score here and Broughton's coding here. That really large correlation is a bit of a lie, because part of the coding is absolutely objective. If the response has the words building in it, you have no subjective room here. You have to give building 100%, because it is in the response. So there's already a floor of a huge correlation, because all of these participants are very well trained in giving very specific responses. So there's a floor of a large correlation anyway. So don't get misled by these significant correlations. This judge-free method produces significant results relatively independent of coder. And perhaps because of reduced variance by a reduced subjective assessment, figure of merit method currently does not contain spatial relationships. For example, there's nothing in that figure of merit thing that says the town is underneath the mountain which is next to the river. There's no spatial relationships there. This is very, very crude, and it's amazing to me that it works as well as it does. Maybe to produce significant confidence call, it takes a trained, experienced coder, and Richard and I have been talking about that. What does that mean? Hey, look, Ray Hyman beat up on me mercilessly when he accused me of being the only judge on the Stargate remote viewing program, the military one for the feds, U.S. feds. And I said, I'm guilty, but isn't that great? If you want to have a bunch of judges for the ice skating competition for the Olympics, you wouldn't grab people off the street. You'd get somebody who knows a little bit about, ice skating. Well, I think I know a little bit about remote viewing judging. That's a hypothesis, and there are two parts of that. Number one is that I believe I have a good reason to understand what I should pay attention to in general in a remote viewing response as I'm a judge, and I believe I can teach that. That needs to be tested. The second one is each of the remote viewers have idiosyncratic responses. And I've been working with Joe, for example, since 1978. I know their idiosyncratic responses, and that gives me an edge in judging. It doesn't help me lead to the right answer. It just makes me a, quote, better judge for these people. Kathy Dalton's here. She had me judge her really marvelous Gonsfeld study with off-the-chart statistic, and I bombed out completely. I'm a terrible judge for Gonsfeld. Don't call me for that. But here I know what I'm doing. So maybe that's the speculation. Could be I'm a psychic coder, and that's it. I think I'm out of time and did it. Yeah. 5 minutes. That's questions, right? Well, I got 5 more minutes. Oh, good. I'd rather have questions. I'm really done. Jessica.
So did Richard and Wilta and Loli come up with the same 6 and the same 2, or were they different?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that. This just came to me a few days before coming here. So we also want to look at whether, for example, in the paper I say that all 3 participants in that study were individually significant on hit count. And it'd be nice to know, and I don't know that just yet, whether Zoli and Richard also had individual significance on individuals or not.
Well,
Remains to be
I'm
seen.
curious to know if they came up with, and if theirs were a subset of the ones that you had.
Absolutely, that would be a fascinating question, yeah. Russell.
Since this is a very strong precognitive associated with you, do you have any applications in mind?
In case you didn't hear, Russ asked me whether we had, obviously there's associational remote viewing implications for this, and the answer is sure we do. And that's why we did it this way in the first place, because the advantage this has, should everything I've just told you actually be true, is that unlike any other associational remote viewing or actually study that I'm aware of, we have some data before we know the answer whether we should go forward or not on the application. And in this case, I would have done it 12 times and been right 10. That's not a bad hit rate. Stephen.
Will you say a little bit about the target pool from which your target sets are extracted?
Thank you. That target pool has, and I'm not joking, 40 man-years worth of effort into it, spanning back to my time on the SRI project when I joined Hal and Russ. So over the years, the pool has changed, and we've gotten an understanding about what constitutes a pool. It now consists of 300, for this study, half of them, 180, I guess, targets that are from the Corel copyright-free library, and a lot of effort as to what would make a good target contained in them. And as in the paper, I tell you, we do cluster diagram analysis to show to show you how good the orthogonality is of the various groups. So for this particular set of targets, which is a subset of our bigger pool, what I did was to look at that cluster analysis for each of the 12 groups and pick the 3 categories that are as much unlike each other as possible for that particular group of targets. So built into this study, and that's really important, folks, you've got to have targets that are different from one another, not only for a human judge, but a computer's really dumb. So it's got to have as much help as it possibly can. And in this case, it appeared to work.
I have a comment and a question. The comment is, I hope it's a paper quote, that you were referring to Hyman's judge, and he didn't really have any explanation for what the level.
No, he fesses up to that.
Right. Well, my sense, according to what he's done in the past and what other psychops guys have done, I think that was code for a cheating interpretation.
Of course.
Because he's arguing that
Of course.
you are, he's done the same thing with Holmes Schmidt right now.
Yeah.
And I think that's what that is.
Well, not only was I cheating in this, but so was Zoli and Richard.
Yeah, right.
There's a tape recorder on, I can see editing that would kill me here, man.
And my question is, have you done any correlations between the figure of merits and the z-scores, or I guess they're derived from ranking?
No, the z-scores aren't derived from a ranking, they're derived from the cross-match distribution. There's no, what's nice about this, and I think it's really important for remote, for any kind of correlative study in Ganzfolder remote viewing, one should never use ranking in your correlation. Why? Because the rank value depends upon stuff that has nothing to do with the underlying correlation you're looking for. It has to do with how good your orthogonality is. Right? If all your pictures are the same picture, you're going to get lousy ranks, even though you may have great remote viewing. So that's what's so nice about the figure of merit, and there are other rating systems that work. But this one, unfortunately, has the nice feature that you can then compute the null distribution. For me, that's new. And it's so obvious, I'm ashamed that we didn't come up with it a long time ago. Yes, ma'am?
Where is the distance between your participants and what's the result?
Okay. It was independent of distance. Two of the viewers were maybe 5,000 kilometers or thereabouts across the U.S. from Palo Alto, and one of the viewers was in my office. And it depends on how you define good results. One of those people had the best hit rate, was across the country, and another person who had the best confidence call was across the country. So it didn't matter, and the person local had another top-of-the-line statistic. Yes, sir?
Could you a little bit elaborate on the issue how to become a skilled judge of the remote viewing?
It helps to be completely certifiable crazy. That's the first thing. Yeah, the serious part of that is the tendency, and I fall into this trap and have to have it before my head when I'm doing this, is to get immersed in the details. And I think, contrary to Russell and I argue about this all the time, I think remote viewing sucks as a way of getting information about anything. The bit rate, even in our crudest analysis, the bit rate is even below the California telephone system, which is miserable to begin with. So if someone is telling me, oh, there's a padlock and the combination is, I'm not going to I won't even look at that. That is beyond the capacity of remote viewers to tell me accurately about. So I tend to focus through experience on the bigger gestalt elements. Now, one of the things that's come out of our research, which is really interesting, we did a very careful analysis and why relationships are not here, like the mountain is behind the town, is because over years, that does not appear in our remote viewing literature, in our remote viewing database, as a way of getting good information. Relationships are really hard to get, and we have quantitative numbers to support that. So that's why they're not here. Now, what's interesting to me is when you are, as a judge, looking at a target and looking at the response, and I played this trick on you here, you say, oh my God, look how well those match up. In our head, we do that because of the relationships, but the analysis doesn't pay any attention to that. And in a sense, that's why I'm resistant when I'm going to mainstream conferences where I talk about this, to show lots of examples, because it's cheating in a way. What we all do is say, oh my God, look at that match. What is the probability that Joe would draw that given that was the target? That's what we all do, and it's statistically wrong, it's not correct, and it's the wrong way to lead people down a primrose path. And I'm out of time.
I'm going to ask the last question now.
Yes, sir.
In doing the encoding, one of the things that I wanted to ask, is there a significant difference in nationalities with regard to language encoding?
You know, one separate nationality in the form of Zoltan Bashi, he had the lowest hit rates, but that's not enough to make a test on. It's always a very competent researcher and quite fluent in English, but it has to make a difference. For example, give you one example that I'm done. The word for mountain and hill in Hungarian is the same word, hedge. So when he has to struggle with the mountains, which is a different element than hills, he has to struggle with that. So it's got to play some role in different depending upon which culture and which language. Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.